Greetings, I am Gresham's Adam, and welcome back to Gresham Reads Monster Blood Tattoo, Book 1, Foundling, by D.M. Cornish. So, in the previous chapter, Rossamünd was tasked with fetching a new carriage driver for the Landlet. And in doing so, he had also... let's see... where was it? He was also asked about his life in... what was it? Brindleshaw, I believe, was where he grew up. Let's see. Well, he had essentially been asked by Europe about Francetot and Verlaine, and Rossamünd took it upon himself to explain a little bit about his time living in Madame Oprah's. I'm not going to say the full thing. I have said it enough, and I do not wish to say it again. It is a mouthful and completely unnecessary. But afterwards, he had made his way over to Silvernook with the help of the boy. What was his name? Lost Dog, I believe? Little Dog, that was it. Who seemed to hold Rossamünd in high regard due to him being from another city, I believe. But upon first reaching the post where he could look for a... excuse me. Got something in my throat. But upon reaching the post... let's see, where is it? The Imperial Postal Office, that was it. He had been turned away by a rather... how to put it politely, a rather rude individual. However, feeling his luck run out, it in fact actually turned out for the best for a postal office worker whose job it was to deliver mail, apparently requested to join him, as he too needed to make a stop in High Vesting, where Rossamünd was expected by the Lamplighter organization. And as a result of meeting this individual by the name of Fouracres, they proceeded to make their... they are proceeding now to make their way back in order to meet up with Europe once again. Right. Okay. So, I believe I've stalled enough.
You didn't really stall, you just kind of stopped for a few seconds every now and then.
Oh, quiet, Darkus. I'm simply gathering my thoughts.
Yeah, I'm aware.
Right. Well, I suppose it is prudent we move on to... well, I was about to say prejudice. My mind is apparently scattered at the moment. But I believe it is prudent that we move on and continue with the next chapter. Of course, as per usual, these chapters are headed by a definition. This one is Eekers. It is a noun and plural form. Folk who, because of poverty or persecution or in protest, live in wild or marginal places. There, they scrounge what life they can from the surrounding land. Many Eekers are political exiles, sent away from or choosing to leave their home city because of some conflict with a personage of power. It is commonly held that most have become despicable Sidorners so that the monsters will leave them be. They are already mistrusted and despised for their eccentric ways, and such suspicion only makes them doubly so. You okay, Dorcas? Yeah. I'll be fine. Well, I certainly hope so. That was quite a coughing fit.
Yeah. I think it is, failing to breathe correctly and all that.
Right, sure. If you're sure, Dorcas.
Don't worry about it. Just get back to your story. Don't have a lot of time. I do have to work on some on the computer.
I will do my best to get through it as quick as possible. I know you're working on your character.
Also plan on getting all the things I wrote down typed as well.
True. I've seen your little notebook whenever you decide to bring your wallet in. Very interesting. Either way, enough side tangents. Let us begin with Chapter 13, Fouracres. Okay, I saw that one coming. You reared your head back.
Yeah, sorry for that.
Fouracres whistled a cheery tune as they strode past the high hedge walls of the Gentry. Gentry? He walked with an easy stride and smiled at anyone who passed. Rossamünd trotted happily beside him along the weedy strip that ran between the lanes, right down the middle of the road. So, Mr. Rossamünd, the postman finally said, how is it that you could be at the dig with a fancy carriage but no driver? Rossamünd thought for a moment. There was a driver, sir, but he was killed by the Grinlings. Fouracres looked at him. Grinlings? Aye, sir. Those nasty little baskets that attacked us. The ones with sharp teeth and the clothes and the great big ears. Rossamünd stopped short, and looking quickly at the postman's own organs of hearing, hoping he had not offended him. Fouracres seemed not to have noticed any insult. Ah, them. Nasty little baskets indeed. Hereabouts they call them nimble shrews. They've been a-murdering wayfarers here and there in the brindle shawls for the last 3 months or so. I'm sorry to hear they got your driver too. He fought hard, Mr. Fouracres. Killed many, but they got him in the end. I watched it happen. They just smothered him. The postman nodded approvingly. Well, there you have it. To kill 1 or 2 is a daunting thing, but to go slay more? My word, that's a mighty feat indeed. But tell me, what was it that coaxed you and your driver to linger in that part of the woods? It'd be in common knowledge they'd be haunted. The Foundling did not know how to answer. He screwed up his face, scratched his head, puffed and sighed. In the end, he just told the truth. Starting with Madame Opus, he told the entirety of his little adventure to the postman, who listened without interrupting once. So the Ettin's dead then, was all he said when Rossamünd had finished. Aye, he was killed, sir, or near enough to it from what I saw. Rossamünd replied glumly. I was there to watch, but I had nothing to do with it, really. It was a cruel thing, and I didn't know what to do. Fouracres seemed sad to hear this himself. He sighed a heavy sigh. Ah, poor foolish Etten, the postman sighed, distracted, almost to himself. He did not want to listen to me. I warned him this would happen. There you have it, lad. Cruel things like this are done all the year long. Did you speak to the shrewd, Mr. Fouracres? Rossamünd was stunned. Eh? Oh, that I did, and often. The postman answered after a pause. He was on my round, you see, between Harold's Hollow and the Eustace's manor house. I told him no good would come of his enterprise, but he was powerfully put upon by those nasty little knickers to keep it up. Who did the dastardly deed? It was, Miss Europe, sir, and her factotum Licurious. But he died at the task, sir. He was the driver. Ah, the Brandon Rose. I had heard she might have been hired for the job, with that wicked Lear as driver, you say. A fitting end for him, perhaps. The postman gave Rossamünd a keen look. I've not had anything to do with either, but I know the Lazar by her work, and the Lear by his blackened reputation. Is a Brandon Rose as pretty as they say? Rossamünd shrugged, but offered no more. What were the Grinlings doing to the shrewd? He persisted. Huh? The postman looked momentarily distracted. Oh, well, if you go by what the big shrewd said, it was the nimble shrewd's Grinlings, you call them, idea to haunt Brindlestall and stand and deliver travelers. I think they thought that his great size would scare people more. It was inevitable, really. Such a scheme could never last so deep within our domain. Fouracres sucked in a breath. I've seen the misbegotten shrewd about long before now. You ought to have known better, but those Grinlings, I like the name. Very fitting. Those Grinlings must have come in from the Ekermere, or some other wildland up north. I say that because if it was their idea, then they can have only been ignorant of the ways of men, or just plain stupid. Rossamünd listened with rapt fascination. Sorry. Here was a man who had not only seen monsters, he had talked with them. Why couldn't they have made me a postman so I could wander around and talk to monsters too? To Fouracres, he said, I can't believe you actually spoke with the misbegotten shrewd. Well, I did, many times. Great talks they were, very illuminating. Fouracres became sad again. It's a great shame he had to go the way he did. That Eden was a nice enough fellow. Angry tears formed in Rossamünd's eyes. He kicked at a stone and sent it cracking into the trees. I knew it, but she just wouldn't kill him anyway. Now there, Rossamünd, master yourself. The postman soothed, bemused. It's a bitter truth of our world that monsters and the vast majority of folks can't live together, certainly not happily. In every man's land, monsters give way. In monsters' land, every man give way. Every men give way. It's the law of nature. But you lived happily with them. Some I did, that is true, but certainly not all I met were worth stopping to chat with. Besides which, Fouracres leaned closer. I ain't the vast majority of folks. Rossamünd wiped his nose. He was angry still. Things would never be as simple as they were at the Foundlingery. I would have liked to have been his friend too. he growled. The postman leaned forward and replied quietly, almost secretively. A noble feeling, Rossamünd. It does credit to your soul. And I heartily believe you would have made an excellent chum. But I have to warn you not to say as much to many others. Such talk can get you a whole life of trouble. Keep these things to yourself. Fouracres thought for a moment. I'll not trouble you, though, nor say anything of what you just told me. Between us alone, this. But suddenly, he stopped. Stopped talking, stopped walking, and stared rigidly at nothing. Rossamünd had walked some way ahead before he realized. Alarmed, he turned back to the postman. Mr. Was all Fouracres said, his hand whipping up to signal silence. After only a moment more, he stepped forward and whispered to the startled Foundling. We have something wicked on our path. Follow and step very lightly. Your life depends on it. And with that, the postman crept into the trees on their left. Looking over either shoulder in awe, Rossamünd followed as quietly as he could into the wood, every snap and click underfoot causing a chagrined wincing. He could not see anything on the road. How was it possible for this fellow to do so? The ground all about was very flat, and the trees broadly spaced. Some way in, Fouracres found a modest pile of stone all about a small boulder and indicated that this was to be their hiding place. His gizzards buzzing with fear, Rossamünd gratefully hid behind these rocks and found a gap between them through which he stared back at the road. Fouracres put down the large bag he carried and held up a finger, whispering seriously. Darkest.
Yeah, I got it. Hey Google, stop.
Ugh, rotten timing on that. Yeah, I still can't figure it out.
Hey Google, disable all alarms.
Okay, they're all cancelled.
Okay, good. Thank you, Dorcas.
Yeah, no trouble. I'm hoping this time it works. I've tried that before, but it still happened.
Well, fingers crossed, I suppose. Alright, let's see, where was I? Ah, there we go. Fouracres put down the large bag he carried and held up a finger, whispering seriously. No noise, no movement. You're the very soul of stillness, I. The soul of stillness. I, Rossamünd replied in a nervous wheeze. I will be back. The postman returned to the road, rapidly yet with little sound. Watching through the gap in the stones, Rossamünd saw him pick up a long stick as he went, and take something from a satchel he carried and unwrap it. The strangely pleasant odor of John tallow came back to him in the light early afternoon breeze. Quickly, Fouracres skewered the John tallow on the end of the stick and began to rub it on the ground, on trunks, on leaves, creeping off the road and making into the trees on the opposite side. He's making a false trail, Rossamünd realized. With fluid, careful speed, the postman worked deeper into the woods. Rossamünd lost sight of him and began to feel all too familiar panic. I am the very soul of stillness. I am the very soul of stillness, he chanted to himself. There was a click close by. With that one sound, he became the very soul of dread. There, just showing above one of the larger rocks, appeared the glaring head of a monster. Not more than 5 or 6 paces away. His long face was covered in mangy gray fur, with a pointed nose and equally pointed teeth. top ones protruding over the bottom lip. The matted beard grew in limp strands from its chin. It had great rabbit-like ears tipped with black fur that drooped out from behind its eyes. Large yellow eyes rolled about between slitted lids. This creature sniffed at the air as its ears twitched and swiveled. Rossamünd had never imagined such a thing. How very happy he would have been to have Europe with him right now. He clenched every muscle he knew he had, holding his wind for fear that even breathing would make him move too much. I'm not here. Don't see me. I'm not here. Don't see me. However, the creature's attention was clearly absorbed by the perfume of the John tallow. It stalked away without noticing the Foundling cowering in his temporary rock shelter. Remaining frozen, Rossamünd was nevertheless able to watch it through the gaps as it stepped onto the road. Hunched and gaunt and taller than a man, the knicker bent down to smell the spot where Fouracres and the boy had only just been standing. And we have a picture. I wonder if this is a typo, because it says the boggle on the road, but the text calls it a knicker. Its long, furry arms ended in long, furry hands, from which grew long, curved claws that clicked and clacked together with every move of its fingers. Its legs bent backward like the hind legs of a dog, and it used them to walk in an awkward, jerking way. The creature looked up the road, it looked down the road, sniffed at the ground again. Finally, it started into the opposite trees. But where was Fouracres? Daring to move a little, Rossamünd peered through his small gap in the rocks, looking for the postman out there somewhere in the trees. Nothing. Wanting to flee, wailing into the woods, Rossamünd determined instead to be patient. He had survived the Grinlings, the nimble shrews. He could survive this. With a soft snort, the creature pranced further into the shadows of on the other side of the road. It lingered there in the twilight under the eaves. While Rossamünd watched it, he began to get this strange niggling sensation to look to his left. He was reluctant to take his eyes from the creature, but in the end, he did, and looked over his shoulder. There was Fouracres, sneaking back to him, one slow, cautious step at a time, his eyes never leaving the shadows of the opposite wood. Relief. Sweet relief. Rossamünd could not recall ever feeling so glad, so lightened within, to see someone as he did just then. Encouraged, he returned to his vigil, in time to see the creature threading its jaunting way through the trunks, and eventually disappearing from sight. Turning back to watch the postman, he found Fouracres, his eyes still fixed on the farther trees, almost up to the rocks. He no longer had the John tallow. That would be stuck somewhere cunning as far from him as possible on the opposite side. Rossamünd went to move, but the postman cautioned him to remain as still as he had been. "We're not free of it yet," he hissed almost inaudibly, as he crouched down beside the Foundling. Taking the postman's lead, Rossamünd stayed still, and kept his watch through the gap. Muscles began to ache, and an annoying hum started in his ears as he strained to hear any clue of the creature's return. This waiting was getting very hard. Seconds slowed to minutes, minutes slowed to hours. Rossamünd gave Fouracres a pleading look. "Keep waiting." Fouracres insisted once more, and Rossamünd sat till he thought he could not take the buzzing of his joint or the ringing in his ears anymore. He had no idea for how long they waited, just that it was so very long. Even when a carriage went by, they waited still. But when another clattered by only a few minutes later, the postman seemed satisfied, and at last released them, saying, "It's safe enough. Let's get away from here." Leading Rossamünd through the trees, still in silence, Fouracres allowed them to travel on the open road again, only after they put an hour's distance between themselves and their temporary refuge. Once clear of the trees, they hurried the rest of the way and arrived at the Harefoot Dig, safe at last. It was late afternoon. Exhausted, but promising to meet the postman in the common room, Rossamünd went to tell Europe the good news. The reclining, recovering Fouracres received the revelation with her usual laconic grace. "You can trust this fellow." "He's an imperial postman, miss. His whole life is trustworthiness," the Foundling enthused. "Well, if a girl can't trust her own factotum, then who can she?" Europe closed her eyes, signaling the end of the matter. Rossamünd rolled his eyes. And what if a factotum can't trust his mistress? He returned to the common room, too eager to enjoy his last meal, for tomorrow they would be leaving. Fouracres was waiting for him, a pipkin of small wine and 2 mugs already on the table. As they sipped the small wine, Rossamünd showed the postman the cracking, illegible mass that used to be his travel papers, letter of introduction, and the rest. Rossamünd still carried them even though they were next to useless. Thankfully, at least, that Mr. Sebastopol's instructions were so skeletal, for while they lacked detail, they had been easy to memorize. He thought that an imperial postman, especially one as friendly and helpful as Fouracres, would be able to help him with his problem. Fouracres uncreased the puzzle of ruined papers carefully. He inspected the all but dissolved writing gravely. Soon he looked up again. "This is certainly a mess," he concluded, "but the seal is still intact on your traveling certificate, and your name, thank Providence. As to the rest, well, I'll vouch for you. What I call good, the Empire calls good. Your motto will help you too." He pointed to Rossamünd's baldric. "Thank you so much, Mr. Fouracres. I thought I was sunk." "My pleasure, Rossamünd. Though I would recommend you get them rewritten by the clerk or the chief harbor governor as soon as you can. They'll help you with that and in that as well." A meal of black coney pie arrived, and a jug of juice of orange with it. They ate in silence for a time. Eventually, Rossamünd mustered the courage to ask, "Mr. Fouracres, what was that creature back on the road there?" The postman stopped chewing and looked thoughtfully at the ceiling. "I don't rightly know," he answered at last. "Never seen its kind before. Bit of a conundrum. I'll have to ask around." Rossamünd held up his almanac. "I can't find it in here either." "Well, that ain't surprising." Fouracres chuckled. "There's more kinds of monsters than many a book can catalogue." He quickly became sad and serious. Not that most folk think they're worth a cataloguing anyways. Most folk would rather just see him killed and that be the end of it. Or at most, see a list of glaring face tattooed to the limbs of a teratologist. Still, worth a look. Rossamünd returned the book to his lap. Mr. Fouracres, have you ever killed a monster?" "Unfortunately, Mr. Rossamünd, I have been forced to do so, yes." The postman looked sad. "You see, if it's a choice twixt they or me, I choose me each time." "Does that mean you have monster blood tattoos then?" Rossamünd could not help from asking. Fouracres hesitated, and then frowned. "Well, no, actually. Don't go a glorying in killings." Excuse me. I don't go a-glorying in killings my hand's been forced to do. It's just part of getting the poster what it needs to be. Oh. Good lord. Oh. The meal finished, the juice of orange drunk. They parted ways. Fouracres promising to be ready to take the reins on the morrow morning. They set out early, just as the sun had shown itself above the rim of the world. With Sallow detained elsewhere, Rossamünd was trusted to make Europe's treacle. He proudly handed the evenly mixed brew to the Fouracre, and then left her to meet with Fouracres and help prepare the landlet. Europe soon emerged wrapped in a thick, deep magenta coat, knee-length, with its high collar and cuffs trimmed with thick, bleached fox fur. Her hair was held back in loose coils, and she wore pink quartz-lensed spectacles. She appeared very different from when Rossamünd first met her. She also still looked unwell and was, consequently, in a foul mood. The night before, she had settled the account with the proprietors by simply refusing to pay any extra beyond what she owed Dr. Verhoeven, declaring with the cold loftiness of a queen, "The boy's billion has covered expenses, as you well know. You'll not get a gander more out of him, nor out of me." Madame Felicitine went pale, but had not said a word. Mr. Belatus had just ducked his head and said, Right you are. I hope your stay was as comfortable as could have been in the circumstances." With the footman lugging out the Fouracre's saddlebags and other luggage behind her, Europe stepped out into the coachyard. Rossamünd and Fouracres were already seated in the landlet, waiting. The Foundling in the passenger compartment, and the postman ready to drive in the driver's box. Europe stopped by the step of the carriage and stayed there. With a quiet apology, a yardsman went to hand her aboard. She shooed him away, saying, "Leave off, man. It's not your job." Rossamünd had let his attention wander, filling his senses with the beauty of early morning. Only gradually did he become aware things were amiss. He looked dumbly at Europe, puzzled. He remained still, glaring straight ahead through those clear, weird pink spectacles, her chin stuck forward arrogantly. Rossamünd blinked. What's wrong? What is she waiting for? "Miss Europe?" he asked simply. Her eyes flicked him. "Well?" There was an uncomfortable silence. Somehow it dawned on the Foundling what she wanted. "I'm supposed to help her in like Licurius did." He quickly jumped out of the landlet, causing to rock and unsettle the horse. "Whoa, steady lad," Fouracres warned. Ever so subtly, Europe rolled her eyes. With a weak smile, Rossamünd handed the Fouracre aboard and climbed back in once more, feeling very foolish. "Drive on, man," Europe murmured. Without a backwards glance, Fouracres whipped the horse to a start. They went out through broad gates and turned left. Looking back, Rossamünd could see farther along the wall to the pedestrian portal they had been admitted through 3 nights earlier. In his mind, he bid farewell to his first wayhouse. Fouracres turned the landlot right at the junction, and Rossamünd was taken south this time. The Harefoot Dig disappeared behind the trees. The gangway took them through a woodland of younger, graceful pines, with the area of wild lawn between the slender trees. As they went on, large lichen-covered boulders now appeared here and there, and the lawn became sparse and stubbly. An hour out from the wayhouse, the road began to slope gently down, and soon the trees gave way to a broad expanse of rolling downs and even larger lichen-grown stones. Ever so often, thin, rutted paths would lead off from it, going to mysterious, adventurous ends, saw one come to its conclusion at some distant dwelling. There were several of these about, he began to notice. Small stone cottages built high upon lofty foundations, also of stone, with slits for windows and tall chimneys. Smoke wafted from some, that mysterious sign of homely life within. They are the houses of acres, Fouracres explained. Folk who manage to scratch out a living in the thin soil hereabouts. But they lack in material wealth, they gain in liberty. The authorities don't tend to bother them much. But why are they so high off the ground? Fouracres gave a wry smile. To give the boggles a hard time getting them, of course. With a slight arching of her brows, Europe looked knowingly at the postman's back. You've dealt with some yourself, I suppose, she said. This was the first thing she had said all morning. The postman did not look at her. Indeed I have, ma'am, though I'm sure they're near sight fewer than thee. Europe lapsed into silence once more. After 2 hours, the scene changing little, they passed a milestone, a squat block of white, if I could English correctly, a squat block of white rock, upon which was carved high vesting, and beneath that 6 miles. Behind this milestone grew a small, scruffy olive tree. As Rossamünd looked, he was sure he spied movement within. Some was shifting within the bush. He glared into its deep shadows. There within, he was certain there was a figure obscured by the boughs. A little person with a face like an overlarge sparrow and round, glittering dark eyes. A boggle. It shrunk noiselessly into deeper shade, but its eyes remained fixed on Rossamünd, blinking occasionally with a pale flicker. The foundling stared back in breathless wonder, craning his neck as the landlord rattled past and moved on. It's only a milestone, little man. Europe's curt voice intruded. Surely you've seen one before. The horse whickered. The eyes disappeared. Rossamünd sat back quickly, thrilled as he was by such a sight. He felt no inclination to tell Europe of it. He did not want to see this one destroyed as the misbegotten shrew had been. Thinking on the encounter just past, he decided he must have seen a nuglung, one of the littler boggles, so the almanac said, often having an animal's head on a small human-like body, what the almanac called an arthropoid, or like a man. Rossamünd almost couldn't believe it. He had seen a nuglung, a real one. There were stories from ancient times that told of some of these nuglungs doing good things for people, though folk now would never believe such a notion. His almanac was typically brief on them, saying, as it always did about any kind of boggle, that avoidance was the best policy. And the foundling reckoned such advice probably helped the monsters as much as people. Opening a black lacquered box, Europe took out a soft drawstring bag with a stiffened circular bottom. It was a fiasco. Rossamünd had seen them before. In them, he knew women kept their rouges, blushes, and balms, and the tools of beauty. He did not think of Fulgar would need such things, but when she finished dabbing and daubing at her face with the aid of a small looking glass, even a young lad like himself could not help but be amazed by the simple yet profound transformation. He did not think a little rosing of the cheeks and lips and whitening of the nose could be so flattering. A girl's got to look her best for the city, she offered, simply to his gulping. Fouracres turned in the driver's seat to say something and was visibly stunned, turning an unmanly red from earlobe to earlobe. He quickly resumed his original position and muttered over his shoulder awkwardly, "We'll, be at high vesting in an hour or so, miss." Europe smiled weakly. Yes, we had deduced that for ourselves. A mere stone told us the distance about a mile back. but thank you for the thought. She hummed happily and watched the passing scene. Recovering his composure, Fouracres once more spoke over his shoulder. So, Rossamünd, you're going to be a lamplighter, are you? The Foundling did not know how to answer this. Was he a lamplighter, or was he now Europe's factotum? He looked at her quickly. Muffled in her thick coat, she paid him no attention whatsoever, returning to her usual regal reserve. Regal reserve, sorry. That's what I'm supposed for, he ventured, glancing at Europe once more, though I'm not really wanting it. Do you know much about them? A little, answered the postman. As he spoke, he would spend some time looking at Rossamünd from the corner of his eye and at the road with the corner of the other, or turn his back completely and focus on the path ahead. I was thinking of becoming one myself, you see, and the choices were before me. As you can see for yourself, it didn't take my fancy. Here was the proof of his dull future. Too boring, Mr. Fouracres? The postman paused, appearing bemused. That's not so much it as the reverse. This was not the answer Rossamünd had expected. He sat up. How do you mean? I chose the quiet life of a strolling postman, but the lot of a lamplighter was a little too dangerous for mine. Rossamünd found he was holding his breath. Dangerous? I thought they just went out, lit the lamps, and went back home. With a chuckling snort, Francois looked sharply at Rossamünd. That they do. On stretches of road, traveling the fringes of civilization. At times of day that boggles love best to move about in, contending with bandits, poachers, smugglers, mishap on the road itself, living with only a handful of others in isolated places. Then you have to go about changing the water in the lamps themselves, regular for the seasons. That part I'll grant you ain't interesting at all. Not the job for this fellow. The postman pointed to himself with his thumb as he returned his attention to the road. My hours are long and strange enough. My pay is low again as any should bear, without having cause to make any of this worse by joining the Lamplighter service. He gave Rossamünd a cheeky sidelong smile. Ye, however, Rossamünd, seemed to be made of sterner stuff. Well, good for you. It's a good thing your harness is so fine, else you might have something to worry about. However, I'd get yourself a well-made hat before you venture up to Winstermill. Rossamünd did not answer. His thoughts were turning on all the postman had just revealed. Boggles? Bandits? Perhaps the life of a lamplighter might be a whole lot more worthwhile after all. This clarified his path for him. Now he was actually curious, even eager to work his official trade. How do I tell Miss Europe this? The Fulgar had said little more on her desire for him to become her factotum since the first day at the Harefoot Dig. He looked at her once more. Though her expression was resolutely aloof, she seemed sad, not momentarily happy, but troubled with deep, suppressed grief. How different she was from the talkative, boastful woman he had first met in the pastures of Sulkend. A tiny ache set in Rossamünd's soul. He felt sorry for her loss of the curious, however foul the Liam had been, and he had an inkling that his devoted service might take that grief away. He was confused again. Pondering intently on these things, he did not notice three crusty folks sitting on the side of the road with their rumbling carts and rickety donkeys, till the sound of their chatter caught his attention. They were sellers of vegetables of many kinds. Fouracres hailed them as the landlord passed. "Oi, gentle Eakers, do you have any letters to send?" All three smiled with genuine, almost bursting joy, one of them crying, "Ah, bless ye, Bless ye, Master Fourfields. No letters from us today. She marveled at the landlet. What a pretty pair of legs you're traveling on this evening. Much easier on the boot leather than your usual ones. She tossed a large pumpkin to the postman. And blessings to thee, Mother Fly, Mother Mold, Farmer Math. Sorry I can't stop, but these pretty legs have places that are taking me. He grinned back, slowing the landlet and catching the vegetables skillfully. I'll be back along the Termora. We'll have a good natter then. Thanks for the fruit, madam. 'Twill make for a fine soup tonight. Then I'll save me quizzing for anon. The old woman returned in a hoarse, too loud whisper, rolling her intensely curious gaze over Rossamünd, and more especially Europe. The full guard did not even stir, but continued her cool stare at the country on the opposite side. I was about to say countryside on the opposite side. Let's see. The Foundling, however, smiled happily at this rustic dame and her companions, who all returned his friendly expression. Save them all, mother, and get yourself waddling home at the right time, Fouracres said cheekily. Darkness comes too early this time of year, and a chance of boggles with it. Mother Fly laughed a dry and crackling laugh. And you'd better pass on yourself, Fancy Legs. You've still got a ways to rattle before you can make your soup. Till tomorrow. Till tomorrow. With that, they passed on, Mother Fly waving cheerfully. When they had gone a little further, Fouracres informed him, some of the Ekas I was telling you about. Good people, as hospitable as they get. Rossamünd wondered how such happy folk as these could bear to live in those tottering cottages out in this bear-haunted place. They crested a small rise in the road, and before them, the land spread out and down a large basin that found its way to the sea. Rossamünd assumed it must be the mighty Groom, though he had never seen it before. So much water, and as sickly a green as Master Franstart or Master Heidelberg or Master Pinsum had ever described. Rossamünd marveled and stared fixedly. The sea. The sea. The cloudy surface seemed to be shifting constantly, much more than the humor ever had. Flecks of dirty white danced, reared up, and then disappeared, the tops of waves. And the smell it blew to them from the basin below. It was like no other odor Rossamünd had ever encountered. Sharp and salty, yet somehow sweet as well. Almost like a hint of orange blossoms in the spring. Europe wrinkled her nose with a look of mild distaste. Fouracres turned to them beaming with satisfaction. He breathed in deeply. Ah, the stink of the Groom. Nothing quite like it. They say that the kelp forests just offshore improve its stink somewhat. That out in the deeper waters it does not smell so sweet. Makes me glad I'm not a sailor. Now look there, my boy. That is high vesting. Below and before them, on the shores of the Groom, was a cluttered knot of marble, granite, and masonry that was the high protecting walls and buildings of the fortress city of High Vesting. It was not nearly as big as Boschenberg, but somehow seemed far more threatening. Great white towers taller than any Rossamünd had known, stuck up from all the usual domes and spires. Out in the water, giant blocks of stone had been laid out in a great groin that protected the harbor. In this harbor, which the almanac had named the Mullhaven, were ships. Actual ships. Even from here, he could tell what kinds they were from his lessons under Master Heidelberg. There were low, menacing rams, solid block-like cargoes and grand cargoes, and sleek ships still running under sail in this age of the Gastrin, many being guided and poked about the harbor by small Gastrin craft known as drudges. He had been told about the great size of these vessels, but was not prepared for just how big they were. He could not wait to get to high vesting now, to go down to its docks and stand near these monstrous craft. It might well be the last time he got to see ships. He looked back at Europe, who had been so quiet the whole way. She too was staring at the fortress city and looked bored. He turned to the Foundling and seemed to search his face, heavy thoughts stirring inexplicably in her expression. Her attention remained fixed, so for only an instant. Then she went back to gazing at their destination. As they drove down the southern side of the rise and into the basin, the gangway became much broader, its paving smoother. On either side grew unbroken lanes of tall, leafless trees with smooth silver-gray bark and high, curving branches. This late in autumn, their fallen leaves were piled in great drifts along the verges. Other roads and paths joined from the surrounding farms and villages, and with them, more traffic. Some of their fellow travelers gave the landlord a curious or suspicious inspection. Soon enough, they joined the queue. Oh, good lord. Soon enough, they joined with the queue of vehicles and pedestrians waiting to pass the scrutiny of the gate wardens, who wore uniforms similar to the soldiers of Borschenberg, and enter high vesting by her massive iron gates. Before long, they will be within the walls. With vague apprehension, Rossamünd wondered if, after all this time, Mr. Germanicus would still be waiting for them. Well, that calls for chapter 13. It certainly was interesting traveling about with them. And it was a fairly slow chapter. Kind of lengthy, but it is interesting learning of the environment, as well as learning how Fouracres interacts with other individuals. He is certainly a very cheerful fellow, one who is honestly a very respectable individual as well. But either way, I definitely look forward to seeing what happens now that they are in high vesting. Next chapter makes me think we're going to see someone, either from Rossamünd's past or from the beginning of the book, once again. But that'll have to be for next week. So, thank you all for joining me. If you enjoyed this chapter, feel free to leave a like and a comment down below your thoughts and opinions on the story so far. Also, make sure to share the video around. Your views do help this channel to grow and brings us one step closer to doing this full time. In the meantime, make sure to also subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you can be alerted whenever another video goes live or whenever a new video is uploaded or Darkest goes live. Speaking of which, Darkest is now also streaming on Twitch as well as YouTube at the same time, so if you wish to interact, feel free to join him on Mondays, Thursdays, and Fridays. I'm leaving out Saturdays because Darkest just got into a TTRPG campaign on Saturdays during the time he would normally stream, so that's the reason why streams have stopped on those days, starting this week. But in the meantime, I will see you all in the next video. And I am Gresham's it all, and I do hope you have a pleasant day.